He won't make it 3 miles. He did 3 tours with me in Kandahar. He saved my life twice. Please, picture this. You're standing in a brightly lit, totally sterile human emergency room. The automatic doors slide open, and a desperate veteran staggers in. He's completely soaked in rain and blood, and he's cradling an 80-pound dying Belgian Malinois in his arms. He's literally begging for a miracle. What do you do?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really profound, honestly heartbreaking conflict. We're looking at the absolute, unwavering devotion of military working dogs and what happens when that pure loyalty crashes head-on into cold, rigid bureaucracy.
It really makes you wonder, right? What happens when the very system built to protect our heroes actually ends up destroying them? Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack a massive systemic betrayal, one that treats our most loyal, silent veterans as disposable liabilities instead of the lifesavers they truly are. Section 1. The unbreakable canine bond, the instinct to protect. To really grasp the gravity of this whole conflict, we've got to understand the sheer stakes of a canine's loyalty. Before we go back to that emergency room, let's look at the incredible story of a stray dog named Ghost. Okay, consider the absolute impossibility of what this animal pulled off. Ghost was just a 10-month-old stray German Shepherd, basically a puppy. A brutal storm triggers these deadly mudslides in the Great Smoky Mountains, and a 5-year-old girl named Irene goes missing in the forest. The terrain gets so bad, human rapid response teams actually have to suspend their search. But Ghost, he doesn't stop. He tracks her down and then hikes back through the freezing mud to guide her dad to her. And why did he do it? Because earlier that day, a terrified little Irene had shared her only survival ration with him and wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. That one single act of kindness triggered a fierce, unbreakable protective instinct. He risked his life for a little girl he barely knew. That is the pure, untainted loyalty we're talking about here. Section 2. Breaking the rules, bureaucracy versus blood. Now, we need to contrast that pure loyalty with what happens when it slams straight into a sterile, unforgiving hospital system.
Which brings us right back to our human ER. Nurse Sadie is standing face-to-face with the veteran, John, and his bleeding canine Riggs. Instantly, Sadie is confronted by the hospital's rigid rules. The institutional mindset is totally clear and totally cold. Someone actually tells her, "You do not bring an animal into a human trauma center." Do you know what the liability is? Sadie is staring at an animal that took a massive traffic impact just to save a soldier. But the system, they only see a massive health code violation. And the horrific absurdity of this bureaucracy becomes painfully clear. Sadie's boss, Administrator Hayes, bursts into the trauma bay and catches Sadie trying to save the dog. When Sadie points out that the animal will literally die if they force him out into the freezing rain, Hayes just snaps back, then he dies on the floor. We are not a veterinary clinic. The administration cares infinitely more about Joint Commission protocols and avoiding lawsuits than it does about the life taking its last gasps right there on their table. So, here is the impossible choice in Trauma Bay 3. Option 1, the official protocol. Deny care, protect your liability, and let the canine die. Option 2, the moral choice. Pack the wound, staple the artery, push human O-negative blood to stabilize the animal, and, inevitably, lose your job. Sadie chose to act like a soldier rather than a bureaucrat. She saved Riggs. And for that, she was immediately suspended and fired. She ruined her civilian career to honor the debt we owe these animals. Section 3. Exposing the system, the whistleblower. But what if this bureaucratic apathy isn't just about rigid hospital rules? What if it turns into an active, intentional cover-up? Let's dive into a sprawling conspiracy. Enter Natalie Oakes. Natalie was a former canine medical specialist working in combat canine recovery. Basically, this is the critical evaluation period right before retirement, when military working dogs get their final medical assessments. They do this to figure out what kind of homes and medical care they're going to need for the rest of their lives. But Natalie began to witness a horrifying pattern of abuse during these exact transition assessments. Take the case of a dog named Bravo. When veteran Garrett Cole brought his retired canine, Bravo, into Natalie's civilian clinic, a truly shocking reality emerged. Bravo's official clearance record, issued by a contractor called Vantage Assessment Group, just 14 months prior, stated he was perfectly healthy, cleared for placement. But the clinical reality that Natalie's x-rays uncovered, Bravo had a severe hip fracture that was 12 to 18 months old. He'd been suffering in chronic pain with severe structural bone remodeling. The dog had been agonizingly pushing through a massive injury, masking his pain to protect his handler. And his records? They had been actively falsified to hide it. The scope of this fraud was just devastating. 63, the contractor's lead evaluator, a guy named Harwick, had evaluated and falsely cleared 63 military working dogs. That is 63 heroes sent into civilian life without the pain management or surgical care they desperately, desperately needed. And the tragic consequence of that systemic betrayal? 11. 11 of those 63 dogs were now dead. This actually includes 3 who were euthanized by their adoptive placement families, families who were completely unaware of their animals' hidden, untreated trauma until the dogs' bodies entirely gave out. So, how did someone get away with this? Well, they didn't. Not entirely. In year 1, Natalie noticed the discrepancies and filed a formal canine medical fraud complaint. By year 1.5, her superiors buried the complaint, and she separated from the military. That she quietly kept her own physical logs. It wasn't until year 3 that a federal raid was finally triggered. And get this, when the walls started closing in, Hartwick actually used a forged document to try and frame Natalie for the fraud. But Natalie had played the long game. She held on to every single piece of documentation for 3 whole years, just waiting until the system could be forced to listen. Because look, this wasn't an accident. This was a highly coordinated network. You had lead evaluator Harwick falsifying the clearances. You had Deputy Compliance Officer Filton Reed, who used his federal archive access to forge the documents trying to frame Natalie. And at the very top, Colonel Warren Stahl. He provided the institutional protection, burying Natalie's initial complaints years ago, all in exchange for lucrative payouts from a subsidiary account. It was an entire network, orchestrated by the exact people sworn to protect these animals. Section 4, the price of accountability, the aftermath. So how do you dismantle a machine like that? Let's look at Natalie's meticulous preparation. The actual takedown happened in a matter of hours. Step 1. Federal investigators traced the fabricated metadata on the forged document straight back to Reed, the compliance officer. He folded immediately. Step 2. A financial analyst uncovered the hidden subsidiary account, funneling money to Colonel Stahl. And step 3. Natalie finally deployed her 3 years of perfectly preserved physical logs, completely trapping the conspirators in their own lies. It was a rapid, surgical progression that resulted in immediate arrests and the absolute dismantling of Stahl's operation. But as the dust settled, Natalie shared a really profound, sobering thought. Accountability is just the consequence arriving eventually. It's not the same as the years. Yes, they stopped the fraud. Yes, the remaining dogs were tracked down and treated. Bravo finally got his surgery. But absolutely nothing gives back the years of silent, agonizing pain endured by those loyal canines. The machinery worked, but the cost was just staggering. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy question. Does it feel like justice, or just the machinery finally catching up? These animals serve us without question. They walk into storms, they take bullets, and they literally mask their own pain just to protect us. It's really up to us to decide what our ongoing moral debt to them truly looks like, and honestly, whether our systems are worthy of their loyalty. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it sparked your curiosity, challenged your perspective, and left you wanting to learn more about the heroes who walk on 4 paws. Catch you next time.